So it's very much starting to look like we've entered a new phase in the war. A lot of stuff has happened in the last couple of weeks in Ukraine, and things have started to change and move a lot faster than they have for quite some time. Really, the territorial changes we're seeing now are something we haven't really seen since the Kharkov counteroffensive of October in 2022, where Ukraine succeeded in pushing the advanced Russian formations back to more defensible lines. Since then, we really haven't seen the front lines move that much. Now, Russia's been focusing on taking strategically important cities and towns, industrial areas, communication and logistical hubs, kind of the hard points of Ukrainian fortifications, primarily in Donbass, and just kind of gradually inching forward, making advantage of their superior firepower and air power, with the exception of some of the stuff that happened in Bakhmut with Prigozhin. They've very much been playing extremely conservatively and taking almost no chances. Ukraine, on the other hand, launched the ill-conceived summer, spring, fall counteroffensive of last year, which was a total disaster. It retook very, very small amounts of ground, I think all of which has been recaptured by Russia by this point. And it caused in my opinion, irrecoverable losses in terms of trained manpower and military equipment that basically, I think, prevents Ukraine from launching another major offensive and has permanently crippled the Ukrainian army. Once again, that's not to say the Ukrainian army isn't continuing to fight and fight hard, but I do think that the counteroffensive and the amount of devastation that it inflicted on the Ukrainian army is something that can't be recovered from. And I think after that, the initiative permanently shifted to Russia. However, we really haven't seen Russia do very much with that initiative. They took Avdiivka, they finished the Battle of Bakhmut, some other stuff happened, but by and large, they've just kind of been pushing gradually along the front lines. Now, the big story that came out today, and a lot of this is still very much up in the air, we aren't really sure what's going on yet, but I've heard reports that Russia is launching a offensive in the Kharkov area. Now, we'll get into this a bit more in a minute, but this is long suspected where Russia was going to launch their big offensive. That Kharkov has always been a major goal. It's a very culturally, historically significant Russian city. It's very economically important. As you can see, it's very important just looking at the rail network and the road network on this map. It's also kind of a logical, if you're going to be taking Luhansk and Donetsk and these other places, it's a logical place to move your border forward. Russia has also been saying they want to take a exclusion zone, if you will, in Ukraine that will provide a buffer, making it harder for Ukraine to attack Russia proper. So it seems like a large Russian force is coming across the border. Now, I've heard, and once again, these reports are not really confirmed. I think it's safe to say there is some sort of offensive coming across the border. Now, I've heard that Russia's sending approximately 50,000 soldiers with 400 armored vehicles. Sorry, 400 tanks, a bunch more extra armored vehicles, but that really doesn't seem like a very large force to launch an offensive in of itself. It's maybe enough to poke at it, but if you're going to launch a big offensive towards a large urban area like Kharkov, you're going to want a much bigger force than that. So I'm not entirely sure if this is to create a buffer zone, if this is to get Ukraine to redeploy soldiers from other fronts up to there, if maybe this is just the advanced guard and they're there to secure road lines and then the rest of the army is going to go forward. That seems like quite a few tanks, so maybe it is going to be like an armored spearhead or something like that. We haven't really seen too many massed armored assaults recently, but it does look like there is an offensive of some description being launched there in the Kharkov region. Whether the goal is Kharkov itself, we aren't really sure. And that is a big development. Like I said, we haven't really seen a new front open up in this war in well over a year. I can't think of the last time a new front opened up. I guess they've been trying to open up the Crimean front by shooting missiles ineffectively at Crimea. But by and large, like I said, the lines have been pretty static and pretty stable for the last the last year or so. So if we take a look along the front lines, we can see that Russia's pushing pretty much everywhere. In northern Ukraine, they're pushing towards Kupiansk from multiple directions. I notice a lot of this as we go through these. It looks like Russia, I'm not sure if they're trying to cut off Ukrainian forces or what the plan is. It looks like they're creating a whole bunch of pockets, though, if you start to look at how it's going. But you'll notice that they're pushing on a whole bunch of fronts. Now, Russia, by this point in the war, it's generally, I think, agreed upon, has a larger overall army. That is, in terms of the sheer number of men that they have in fighting condition on the front lines, is probably larger than Ukraine's, even with all the conscription and mobilization laws that Ukraine has passed. So it's not like it was back in 2022 where Russia was at a significant numerical disadvantage. It had to resort to using its superior firepower and digging massive trench networks to try to offset the fact that they were outnumbered in terms of raw manpower. So they can launch offensives at multiple locations now, and it's in their interest to divide up the Ukrainian army, because oftentimes in war, attacking a whole bunch of places when you have a bigger army allows you to take advantage of your numbers, because your opponent can't necessarily defend everywhere at once, and they might spread themselves so thin that you can just maybe punch through in a particular part of the front line. So it looks like Russia is doing that. So as you can see, we have them pushing all along, particularly in the Bakhmut area. I mean, if you look at this is a lot of minor attacks that are happening, especially when you consider what was going on even a couple weeks ago. I'm not sure how long Chasiv Yar is going to last, but it looks like they're really hitting it hard, and that's been a long-term target. But even if you go down, Russia's launching a whole bunch of offensives in the Avdiivka area. I mean, keep in mind, they only took Avdiivka a couple of weeks ago, and they've already made like a lot of progress. It looks like they're pushing basically all along this area. It doesn't look like I don't think the Ukrainians really have much to stop them at this point in time. Avdiivka was the last major fortress city in Donbass, and now that it's been taken, I'm just not really sure what else they have. I've seen articles suggesting there really isn't any other major fortifications between here and the Dnieper. We also have additional movements in the south, Vuhledar. I can't pronounce a lot of these names, but also just in the south, Robotynya. Once again, I'm not sure if the goal here is to create pockets and try to encircle Ukrainian forces, but the point is that Russia is hitting in multiple places. It looks like they're launching at least, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Four to six major significant offensives at once, and Ukraine's going to have to try to defend all these different areas at the same time. Now, the big question is, what are these offensives going to be? Are these going to be what we've seen so far, this gradual usage of superior air power, superior artillery, other types of firepower, and just the gradual moving along, not taking any risks, just blowing everything away with superior firepower, and not worrying too much about a particular timetable or political pressure or how it looks in the 6 o'clock nightly news or whatever, but just the focus is gradually winning the war? Or are they going to suggest that now is the time to hit the Ukrainian army as hard as they can, maybe to just push very hard in all these different directions and to create a state of total confusion and collapse? And I guess that's the question now: is this the big offensive? Because people have been suggesting for quite some time that, like I said, that there is a big offensive coming. Now, why did people think that there was a big offensive coming? And as I said, I'm not really sure. This could be like the big YOLO arrow offensive. This could go back to being a war of movement. or this could just be Russia pushing along all fronts in a slow, methodical manner. We aren't really sure yet, but we'll probably find out in the next couple of weeks. So the situation that has been going on pretty much since the Kharkov counteroffensive, but really towards the entirety of 2023, is Russia has taken a very long-term view of this war. After their initial attempt to force a capitulation failed, they pulled back to defensible areas, built really very elaborate trench lines, and have just been focusing on building up. In RTS terms, they've been focusing on their macro. So all their factories are going full steam. They've activated all their all their reserve capacity. They've brought all their stuff out of storage. They're expanding their factories rapidly. The way Russia's defense system is set up, because it's state-owned and because it's designed to be for purpose rather than profit, means that they can rapidly increase their output of various weapons. It depends who you ask, but it is a number of times, like 5 to 10 or whatever times the number of artillery shells they can produce a month compared to America and Europe. And it's even higher if we start going to things like cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, tanks, I think even aircraft. Just all the kind of the stuff you need to fight a war. Russia is capable of producing a lot of it, and its capacity to produce it is going up all the time. Additionally, Russia did one major mobilization near the beginning of the war, but since then they've been mostly relying upon recruits. Now, if we believe the Russian Defense Ministry's numbers, it's approximately 1,000 guys a day sign up for the Russian army. So probably about 30,000 or so a month sign up. Now, what percentage of these are reservists who decide to go full time? I'm not really sure. If you look at the benefits, Russia dramatically raised how much they pay their soldiers, and that seems to have helped a lot. There's a whole bunch of benefits. It's very well paying, and so a lot of people are seeking a career in the military now. Also, it's the war's going well compared to how it was looking in 2022, so people are more eager to kind of get in on the bandwagon, as it doesn't look like it's a hopeless cause. But the point is, Russia has not had to resort to further conscription. They have just had to rely on recruitment. And what they have been doing, and this is something, and I'm talking about kind of the long-term trends that brings us to this point, is, to my understanding, the new people Russia's recruiting and the new men they mobilized are receiving standard military training, which is up to a year. I think it's 8 months to a year. But the people Russia are taking are getting regular training. They're learning how to do everything. They're working with their units. They are raw soldiers. They are fresh soldiers, but they are soldiers who have had professional training. They're not like just some guy they took off the street and gave a gun to, and that they're using in human wave tactics or whatever. They are professional soldiers, albeit unbloodied ones. And I'm sure they have lots of men who have served in frontline combat who they can use to help train these guys and get them up to speed. And that's part of the reason there hasn't been a major offensive and why people think there's one coming, because they've got all these guys recruited and they haven't really used most of them in the war yet. They've just been building up their reserves more and more and more behind the battle lines. They've been producing more and more tanks and missiles and artillery shells and stuff like that. Meanwhile, Ukraine doesn't have the same doesn't have the same scenario. The war is going poorly. All the people who wanted to sign up signed up a long time ago. A lot of the male population has fled the country. They're kind of just grabbing people off the streets now. Morale is extremely low. People are bribing their way out. People are swimming across rivers. They've had to start, ironically, patrolling the borders of with NATO countries because so many Ukrainians are fleeing across them. They want to prevent illegal immigration from Ukraine to Poland and Hungary and Slovakia. The big issue, though, is trained manpower. Now, I stressed earlier on that, to the best of my understanding, the Russian soldiers are getting full course of training. I've talked about this many times. There's been articles from Western instructors that say a lot of the Ukrainian soldiers are getting maybe a month of training if they're lucky, in some cases weeks, in some cases even days before they're thrown into battle. Now, if you just conscript everybody, you can get a pretty large army quick. If you just basically take your entire male population who can walk and shoot a gun and put them into uniform, even if you're a small country, you can raise a pretty big force. The problem is, A, you won't have equipment for these people, and B, they won't have proper training. As I've said numerous times, war is an extremely complex thing to deal with. And one of the most important things, if you're a soldier, and people have confirmed this to me, is you know what to do, and you know what to do instinctively and without freezing up and without having to think about it. I mean, when you have the whole like boot camp and the drill sergeant's yelling at you and he's insulting you and they're making all this loud noise and stuff like that, that's not just to be mean. That's to teach you, get you used to having to deal with the absolute chaos of battle, of just all this stress, all this stuff going on, and being able to stay calm during that. And you do things like firing drills and digging trenches and all that kind of stuff, time after time after time, so you can do it in your sleep. So when that happens, when all the insane stuff is going on, you know what to do and you're able to immediately do it. And training won't ever really make up for experience, but someone who doesn't freeze up in combat, who doesn't break and run away, and has a general idea what they're doing is going to do much, much better than someone who doesn't. Also, just when you think of a lot of things, that's just being an infantryman. Like, to my understanding, you can teach someone to drive a tank and shoot the gun relatively easily, but there's all the electronics, there's all the quirks of how the particular thing works. There's coordinating with other people, like the infantry are calling in fire support. Where do you shoot? Just all that kind of stuff. And once again, you don't want people freezing up. You don't want people to go, oh, I have to look at the manual. You want them to know this stuff in their sleep. And that's the ideal. And oftentimes you have to cut corners. But there's a difference between cutting training from maybe 10 months to 8 months and cutting training from 8 months to like 8 days. That is a big, big difference. And Ukraine's trained manpower has basically been wiped out. The remaining trained manpower they have has either been in this war for 2 years or it's in the right-wing nationalist brigades, many of which have been held back because they're seen as being politically reliable, and Zelensky more or less had a sense of favoritism towards them because he ideologically agreed with them, and he would kind of keep them back as a sort of Praetorian Guard. But Ukraine doesn't have trained manpower anymore. And even if they could draft, I don't know, another like 3 million people, they don't have the time with how bad things are going to get these people at like acceptable training, to get them to the point where they are effective as a fighting force and effective as individual soldiers. It doesn't matter how brave they are, and they have been extremely brave and extremely heroic under horrific circumstances. But if you don't know what you're supposed to do in battle, if you're not trained on the equipment you're using, if you don't know the tactics and the formations and stuff like that, there's only so much you can do. And so as time goes on, the Russian army is getting more and more experience, better and better trained, and the Ukrainian army is getting worse and worse. We also, like I said, have the whole issue with industrial capacity. Ukraine's defense industry is basically non-existent at this point. Russia's just blown it up. They're entirely dependent upon whatever the West chooses to give them. Western military stocks are designed for very high performance, complicated weapon systems that are primarily used in low intensity conflicts. They don't have really the conventional weaponry reserves that Russia has. Like the UK has, I think, 100 operational tanks or something like that, compared to thousands for Russia. Now, are those tanks good quality? Well, we would have said so, although they didn't really perform particularly well. In Ukraine, although once again, you're getting people with minimal training on a weapon system and throwing them into battle with no air support, and no actual combined arms training. So I mean, the best weapon in the world isn't going to help you if you have no idea how to use it. But they just aren't able to do the kind of things Russia does. They aren't able to make hundreds of thousands of shells a month, to just turn out ballistic and cruise missiles and glide bombs and all this other stuff. Ukraine can build drones, but it's not as if Russia can't build drones themselves. So as time goes on, the situation that we have seen is Russia gets stronger by the day. They have more men, they're better trained, they have more weaponry, they've developed more sophisticated weaponry. I've heard that their electronic warfare is getting to the point where they can disable a majority of Ukrainian drones. I've seen up to 80. They have like these portable jamming packs that soldiers carry around with them. They have innovative stuff like the turtle tank, and they even were using some like robot tanks, so that didn't really work very well. But the point is, they're getting more sophisticated, and they're getting stronger all the time. Ukraine is dependent upon whatever the West chooses to give them, and the West is largely out of stuff. Most of the European countries don't have enough left to equip their own armies. The US Army has given away most of its reserve stockpiles. And if they start giving more, it's going to severely affect the readiness of the remaining, or rather of their regular army. So they don't really want to do that. Now, a big narrative that we've heard lately is that Ukraine was winning, but aid got held up. Now, it was revealed that aid actually wasn't held up. Funding got held up. So what was happening during the gap between the 61 billion and the previous aid package is Biden was just sending weapons as per normal to Ukraine, which I'm not even sure if that was legal. But the aid package is just to pay back the money that he basically stole to give those weapons to Ukraine. So he gave the weapons to Ukraine without having any funding for them, and they're back funding the stuff that was being given. So it's more stuff is coming, but it's not as if stuff wasn't going there the whole time. And so this is the situation that we're in, where what is Russia going to do? Are they just going to do this indefinitely? Are they going to do what's called active defense or aggressive attrition, or whatever term you want to use, and just keep whittling Ukraine down and whittling Ukraine down? Or is there a point where they feel that they've done enough, that they've destroyed Ukraine's artillery, destroyed their air defenses, that they can launch this big offensive and not face the same issues that they faced in 2022, with Ukraine using anti-tank systems and all the other stuff? And it's an open question. And so people have been predicting for months now, when is this going to happen? Is it going to happen once the ground freezes? Is it going to be a winter offensive? Are they going to wait until the ground hardens again after the Bitchute, I think it's called, the spring rains? When is Russia going to attack? Are they just going to go all across the front line? Are they just going to get like some of these new brigades that they've been forming, get like 200, 300,000 men and just sweep into Kharkov? Are they going to try and maybe go on a different front and retake Kherson and head to Odessa? No one's really sure. And dare I say, that might be a form of strategic ambiguity. You know, it's weird when you don't announce what you're going to do, and you're very like opaque, and you maintain radio silence and OPSEC. People don't really know what you're doing. Like, people don't know, is this Kharkov offensive the big one? Is this just a probing operation? Nobody knows. Nobody knows what the Russian army's general staff is. That's why there's so many speculation videos. They didn't release a trailer. They didn't just announce it. So once again, this could be everything, or this could be nothing. This could be Russia going for broke. I've heard a lot of reports that morale in the Ukrainian army is horrific. Surrenders have started to happen more often. Brigades are retreating on their own. Men are refusing to go into hopeless situations. They're led by Sersky, who's a butcher, who basically just throws them into battle when there's no hope of them winning, and they just get slaughtered. Morale is really bad, and some people suggest that if Russia pushes now, if they launch a big aero offensive, the Ukrainian army will just collapse, kind of like the German army did in World War I when you had the 100-Day Offensive, which ironically came after the Spring Offensive. So are we seeing the Russian 100-Day Offensive? Is this going to be the big one, or is this just going to be a new phase in the slow, methodical trench warfare that we're seeing? I don't know, but that I hope summarizes kind of what the situation is at the moment, where we are, and what significant things people think are happening. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully this horrible war comes to an end sooner rather than later, while there's still a Ukrainian nation left.